I'm Tom Ogren, and I'm the author of a number of books on plants and allergies, and I've been studying this for more than 30 years now. And the question I'm asked most often is, how did I get into this, and why do I have terrible allergies? And I don't. But I've been married 48 years, same lady, her name's Yvonne, and she was 15 when I met her, and she was having allergies and asthma, and that's how come she wasn't able to run away. The asthma was slowing her down. But at some point in our life, we were buying another house, and I had in my mind, it would be nice if I could, the landscape didn't impress me. I was a horticulturalist and a horticulture teacher and a landscaper. And I thought, what if I landscape this so nothing in this yard will ever make Yvonne sick? So at least she'll have her own cocooned area. And the more I thought about it, the better I liked the idea. And so I went out to buy a book on allergy-free gardening. And the first librarian I asked about it was a university, and she laughed. And I said, well, what's so funny? And she said, well, it's the gardens that cause all the allergies. But I had already learned a few things by that point. And I had learned that some plants did and some didn't. I didn't know all of that at all, believe me, but I had been doing sniff tests with my students, teaching landscape gardening in a prison. And we didn't beat them or anything to make them do the sniff. It was voluntary, and I did them myself. But the very first plant, in fact, the thing that got the idea in my head is my sister Rachel got me, she lives in Berkeley, and she likes to get me to come up and do landscaping work for free whenever she can, you know. She's got her own expert, and price is right. And so I was up there doing some work for her and putting in water lines and so on in Berkeley, and everybody was sneezing. It was springtime, and she was having asthma. And a week later, I was driving home, and I was thinking about it. I live in San Luis Obispo, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know, because at this point I was still thinking allergies were psychosomatic, because I had read a book by a MD about psychosomatic illnesses, and he basically claimed that asthma and allergies were head trip, and that if you really had your act together, you wouldn't have them. And since I didn't have them, I believed it, you know. And so I would tell my poor wife, well, she'd have an asthma attack. Well, why don't you get your act together? It's just a terrible thing. And so when I finally did get into it, I felt very guilty, of course. But the moment, that sort of awe moment when I suddenly felt guilty, was I'm driving back from Rachel's to San Luis Obispo, and I'm thinking of this, and I thought, what? And I knew nothing, really. I knew a lot of plants. I was a good horticulturist, but I knew nothing. I thought, what if we go with my students and we all sniff? We start one flower, and everybody in the class sniffs. We do another, and we record, see if anything does anything. And so I explained it to the class on Monday morning, and they were like, yeah, that's a good idea, let's try it. And so the first flower we ever did was pansies, and everybody in the whole class, maybe 30 guys, they all sniffed pansies, including me, nothing. And we did some double dianthus, and everybody sniffed it, nothing. And already I'm thinking, see, direct right in their face, nothing, you know. And then we were growing a bunch of bottle brush, and we had them in gallon cans where they were flowering. And I sniffed it, nothing. And my foreman sniffed it, nothing. And gave it to this one big muscle-bound, tattooed, tough guy, and he sniffed it. And he sneezed so hard, it like almost knocked everybody, including him, down. And everybody was like, whoa, you know? And everybody thought it was really funny. But by the time we went around the class, I think we had a dozen guys sneezing. And this was on Monday. And they don't give you Allegra or Zyrtec or Claritin in the prison. And on Friday, some of these guys were still sneezing off of one direct sniff off that bottle brush. Now, as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, this is not psychosomatic, you know. this isn't something just and the doctor had said it mostly affected women because they were hysterical or prone to hysteria. And for years I would never even admit this part of the story because I found it embarrassing, as I should have, but I guess enough time has passed. And, but that was my motivation. And so when they laughed at me about a book about it, I thought, well, I'll just figure it out myself. And I started studying. This was pre-computers. And I soon had stacks and stacks of things off my typewriters. And then people started finding I was doing this work. And so they would ask me about some plant. I would have to dig through all these unorganized files. And at one point I decided I was just going to start doing all the landscape plants A to Z. If it took me 10 years, and it took me 12 years, A to Z. And somewhere along the line, I decided I would rank them 1 to 10, every plant. And I developed this whole criteria list. We use close to 140 different criteria. And that's called OPALS. And so a person could know no horticulture. They could see the name of the plant, look it up, see it's a OPALS 3, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst. They go, 3, I could live with that, and that's simplified it. My brother Paul told me, yeah, get some laughs. Well, I'm doing better at that than I expected already. Anyhow, I started thinking about it, and I'll get in depth here in a minute, but I started thinking about this talk, and I thought, well, I'm getting to the point where I've been studying this so long, and I've given so many talks on it, and I have been published on it in the New York Times, last week in Scientific American. I've been published 3-4 times in New Scientist, all sorts of great publications and everything, and things are starting to happen, but I'm getting impatient. And I thought, well, I'm coming to Google, and Google is known to hire the brainiest people in the world, and then to coddle them with free lunches and free lattes and stuff, you know. And I noticed when I was getting my coffee that there was or somewhere here, there was a little sign about allergens in your food. And I thought, well, you know, that's worth mentioning. They're worried about the food allergens, but nobody seems to care about the allergens in the air. And by the way, the food allergens are all related to the pollen allergens. It's usually how you end up getting the food allergens. They're all cross-reactive. And so I thought the focus in my mental head about this talk is going to be to challenge Google. So Google, I challenge Google here. I'm quite serious about it. I talk to people and I say, okay, I'm going to give a Google talk. And they go like, oh, that's awesome. And you ask people, what do they think about Google? And they say, innovative. They say, really smart. They say, make things happen. They say they like a challenge. And so my challenge would be, we take this very complicated Google landscape, and I came up here a few weeks ago and spent some time looking at it. And we take this very complicated, actually quite allergenic landscape, and we transform it into the most allergy-friendly landscape in California, the most allergy-friendly landscape in the United States, the most healthiest allergy-friendly landscape in the entire world, and we do it right here at Google so that the people that work at Google will be the ones that benefit the most. Now, as I get into this, you'll see that my talk is a lot more than just about allergies. Not to minimize allergies. For people who have them, it could be miserable. Fire away there, Stuart. All right, that's a picture I took. The pollen didn't come from my house. This is at my house. And in the background, by the way, there's the largest dawn redwood, Metasequoia glyptostroidioides, in the entire United States in my front yard. It's cracking my foundation and everything. I can't do anything about it. It's ruining my sewer pipes, but it's the biggest one in the United States. And the pollen comes off this thing was parked next to a row of male juniper bushes. that showered it, and okay, flip, Stuart. The story behind this, 2 years ago, Johnson & Johnson hired me to drive, to go coast to coast in Canada and do an allergy audit of their urban forests in the 11 largest cities. So I started on Vancouver Island. I drove my truck all the way to Halifax. And in each city, I spent a week or two just walking around with a clipboard and a camera and binoculars for looking up in these tall trees and sexing trees. And I was in a hotel room in Toronto. Now, ash tree is a big, massive tree. There are literally thousands of them right here at Google. And they're separate sex. So one tree is all male, one is all female. Probably 99% of them at Google are male. The males produce the pollen, not the females. So I picked a couple of these little clusters that were not shedding pollen, and I brought them up to my hotel room and I set them on a piece of paper and I printed out something, or maybe they did that. But the next day, when I gave them a little tap, that's how it looked. That's how much pollen was just coming off a couple of little clusters. Now, on a big tree, there's tens of thousands of these clusters. Fire away. All right, I threw this up here because I'm not an MD, I'm not a PhD. I'm a horticulturalist with extreme deep interest in health and allergies. But I've been shopping the new book, and I guess we can only see part of this, but these are some very, very good big-time allergists around the world that are pretty much saying that my work is right on the money. But you notice it says alternative and complementary approach to this. And I'm not trying to take the place of doctors or anything, believe me. But this is an alternative and it is complementary. It will make everything better, big time. Go for that. Botanical sexism is what I'm credited with discovering a number of things, and one of them is botanical sexism, and this is the fact that every time they could make a choice between a male and a female bush or tree in the cities, pretty much everywhere in the civilized world, from New Zealand to Nova Scotia, they always went with the male, and that's because the females drop seeds or pods or fruits or something. But the males drop stuff too. This is a male cedar tree, and that's pollen on the ground. Not going to get too technical here, but I guess I won't even have a chance. Stuart didn't let me. All right, but there's basically 3 types of flowers, and actually there's 20, but I'm not going to get into the fine details. There's perfect flowered like a rose bush. You've got male and female in the same flower. A bee only has to move the pollen from the male part to the female part maybe a 1/4 of an inch or less. The pollen is typically sticky and large, not causing a lot of allergies. However, there are exceptions. Monoecious. Monoecious trees have typically 1 branch is all male, 1 is all female. These used to trap a lot of their own pollen. The parking lot where we're parked in today looks to be about 100 or more monoecious trees. There are no female flowers on them. They've been grafted with parts from the male. That means they won't drop any messy pods, but it means that the parking lot is already allergenic, and 5 years from now it's going to be 20 times more. 3, the ones that I'm the most interested, dioecious, separate sexed. Everybody here is dioecious. Some of us are boys and some are girls. I'll tell you a quick story here before I go any further. I like to work my wife into all this since we've been married so bloody long, and she's put up with me. But around 30 years ago, I was sitting in bed with my wife, and I was reading a book on pollen, big thick thing that almost nobody reads, and she was reading a novel. And I kept reading about those separate sex dioecious species that's causing so much allergies. And some were even saying, don't plant any of these, and they include hundreds of plants. And I suddenly got this bright idea. And I said to my wife, I said, Yvonne, I said, I got this idea. And she said, what's that? And I said, if these plants are really separate sexed, that means one's the male, another one's a female. She said, okay. And I said, they say that like willows and poplars and maple trees cause all this allergy. But I said, if they're separate sexed, think about it. The male is putting all that pollen out. That's his job. The female doesn't produce any pollen. Females don't produce pollen. And my wife said, huh. I said, in fact, if you think about it, the female that traps pollen but never produces any is a true allergy-free plant, isn't it? And she says, oh, you might be onto something, Tom. And I probably wasn't onto anything, but it kept me talking and running my mouth for 30 years. Okay, so the epidemic of allergies and epidemic of asthma, in the 50s, probably around 3-4% had pollen allergies. By 88, I was already into this and studying it, and I was reading about the huge jumps to 12%. By 99, the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology said it was now 38%, appeared to be growing. We don't even know what it is now, but go ahead and flip. Okay, so Charity Allergy in the UK said that, you can read that. The last one is probably more important. Getting pollen allergies more than doubles the chance that a child will develop asthma. Once you got asthma, you got asthma. You don't cure it. And it would be much better if children didn't develop allergies in the first place and that it make them double the susceptibility to getting asthma, which is a lifelong thing. But when I look at landscapes, the very worst ones I see are typically in elementary schools. And the very highest pollen count ever recorded in the United States was taken at an elementary school in Las Vegas. And I went there and visited and took some photos a couple years ago. And there were 24 mature shade trees, and 23 of them were clonal males. And all the bushes were clonal junipers, males. We just setting these kids up with that sort of landscape. All right, so these are all related. Asthma increases chance of getting diabetes, heart disease in the last 20 years. All these huge increases, and all of these things are related. This is where, to me, it almost is starting to get much more serious. This is just data that coming from about 5 years ago, maybe 6. Women who have airborne allergies are at increased risk from leukemia, ovarian cancer, and breast cancer. Let's see what the next slide says. To me, that's a very big deal, especially if we can do something about it. Doesn't seem right. I think my favorite is 1, 2, 3, 4. These were off of newspapers. No rain, lots of pollen. And then rain triggers avalanche of pollen. Tidal wave, pollen vortex. I've given all these talks across the United States and in a bunch of different countries. And I will go places and people will come up afterwards and they say, I don't know if you know it, but this place right here is the worst place in the whole country for allergies. And I'll be like, whoa, actually you've got a lot more company than you think. Can you see the pollen on the ground, on the cement? I wish that had been black or blacktop, but this is a male red maple tree, and this is up in Toronto. When I drove by it, I thought, you know, that's quite illustrative of pollen dispersal. The big problem is that there's been so much misinformation. They would say, pollen blows for 1,000 miles. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, we now find out that things we do will even affect the weather. And believe me, it affects pollen. But the pollen typically on a tree falls very close to the drip line of the tree. And the drip line is just about what it looks. And so if you were to come 10 feet this direction, you would trap a little bit of pollen from that tree, but not very much. And if you got 50 or 100 feet from it, you'd trap hardly any, maybe not enough to make you sick. But if that tree was right over your front porch, or if that tree was over the school benches where your children were eating their lunch, you'd be showering them with that, and that pollen is exceptionally allergenic. So everything is to deal with proximity. You get the best things in proximity. Now they talk about grass pollens a lot, as though there's nothing that we could do about it. But so I brought an example. I brought some of the flyers, and I don't sell this stuff myself, but I know people that grow it. But this is a clone developed UC Davis called UC Verde. That's UC Verde buffalo grass. It's a native grass. It's separate sex. The entire grass is, which is planted from plugs or sod, is a female clone. It stays very low. It needs very little water, very little fertilizer, and it produces zero pollen, and it traps pollen. It's wonderful stuff, and yet you don't see it using much. I'm replanting all the grass areas in my front yard to this same clone. And you maybe have to mow it 2-3 times in a whole year. Wonderful stuff. And then there are other female grasses. I've got 6 different cloned out female grasses at my house, all of which are useful for different. So we could have female grasses if we wanted. Go ahead. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the term xenoestrogens, but a xenoestrogen is something that's an estrogen mimicker. It's a chemical that's very potent. And typically we think of them in plastic water bottles and so on. There are xenoestrogens in those plastic water bottles. The worst thing you could possibly do would be to stick one in a microwave, warm it up, and then drink it. I mean, you might as well just shoot yourself in the foot. But there was a group of college students not too long ago, I don't remember where, but they took water out of a tap water, and they put a flat of soybeans there and another flat over here. One they just watered with the tap water. The other one they took and they put it in the water in a plastic baby bottle, and then they warmed it up in a microwave, and then they let it cool down and they watered the other flat with that. And they grow the soybean plants till they're about this big, and then they pulled them out and tested them. And one of them had almost no PBAs, and the other one was saturated, all right? Now, you picture the urban trees, and as the crow flies, how far are we from the 101 freeway here? Anybody on a mile? Maybe less as the crow flies? Yeah. Okay, so there's extremely good data, and has been for a while, that the closer you live to a major freeway, the shorter your life. Up to 10 years, if you're quite close. And yet, of course, building these houses very close to the freeways. After a mile, that effect starts to weaken out, because you're not getting as much fumes in the air from all this exhaust. The PBAs and 1,000 other chemicals like them are all in that exhaust. And our defense against this are the trees, the city trees. So if we were smart, we would plant massive amounts of huge trees along those freeways to be the first line of defense. And then we would do similar things as we went away. But picture this situation. And let's just say we're back at the elementary school again. And say we're within a mile of a major freeway. And we got a lot of little kids there. And we've got a huge shade tree that we planted growing where the kids are going to eat their lunch. And say it's a dioecious species, as is typically used. Say that tree is a female ash. At a certain point, it will sprinkle seeds all over the tables, all over the ground. Little kids pick them up and throw them at each other. But we could say to the kids, don't eat those seeds. They're not good for you. And because that tree is absorbing all these pollutants from all these cars and all this industry. They're absorbing it from the water, they're absorbing masses of it from the air. Now, say instead of that tree being this big female ash dropping the messy seeds that we could rake up and throw in the trash or compost, say instead it was a male. Now, we shower our kids with all this pollen, and the pollen is the tree's way of releasing all those same pollutants that went into it. Now, when we think of this, it's not hard to see how people with inhalant allergies, and first, why it affects women more than men, I'm not sure, but I think it's because pollen is strongly hormonal, and even the pollen that's androgenic in the body will, through what's called aromatase, will shift to an estrogen form. And so we are bombarding women with all these extra estrogens that they don't need, and we're trashing their system. It's a very, very big problem. It's happening everywhere, and it's like power of Google. I'm like, I want Google to make an example. I would be so proud of myself if I could pull that off. It's like, the people who know me, I don't have expensive taste. It's not like I'm trying to get rich on this. I started this for a fairly noble but guilt-ridden sort of thing. And I'm at the point where I'm seeing how big it's becoming, how important it is to literally millions of people, and more so for children and women. And I was like, whoa, wouldn't that be fabulous if we really made something happen? Good. All right, let's flip and see where we're at. Okay, so it's not just sneezing. And then, it's not just the women get in on this. So you notice that there is a link to increase in prostate cancer. Okay, so real quickly, all trees are not equal. And I get very irritated when the city says, we're going to plant 1 million new trees. And my question, yeah, okay, what kind of trees? Trees. But trees are like people. Some of us are hardworking, some are lazy, some are dumb, some are smart, some are friendly, some are not friendly. Trees are the same way. At some point here, I'm talking basically about tree selection, but I'm also going to talk about pruning, because in an existing landscape like this, there is a pruning scheme to take care of most of this. That I just thought I should throw it up. It was interesting, 10-Speed Press in Berkeley wanted to change the name of the book from The Allergy-Free Gardening, which went through several publications, to the new book, which has a lot of new material, to the Allergy-Fighting Garden. They want to be more proactive. And the more I think about it, I like that, because like a female tree is not just there. It's not that it doesn't produce. It's also pulling pollen out of the air. Quickly on how that happens. You have a female tree and her roots are in the ground. She's grounded, all right? When she blooms, she has millions of little tiny flowers with feathery little stigmas that are slightly sticky. And those stigmas give off a slight negative electrical impulse that's measurable. Pollen grains from a male get in the air and they tumble around on the wind. And they pick up a positive electrical charge. So when you got positive and negative, you have what's called mutual attraction. Like, boom, pulls it in there. Mother Nature did not intend for the pollen just to get there by accident. She designed it this way. Very, very clever. But the problem is that our urban forests are out of balance. We've got huge amounts of males, and some plants we almost never find a female anymore. I just toss this up because, like, if everything else fails, there is the basis for lawsuits now, and I was an expert witness on a case in New Zealand that was won by the doctor whose daughter went to the school, and it resulted in, he had to sue the school board to make it happen, but they removed all these male trees out of the place and replaced them with a clone of female red maple, and they're now big and beautiful shade trees, and they're not producing any allergies. I see a lot more of that down the road. But there was a Minnesota Law Review article on it, and so the stage is sort of set for that. But it'd be better if we could do it without litigation. Go ahead. I just mentioned for a second the one big change in the United States. When I was a little kid, almost every street in America was lined with American elm trees. And they're big, beautiful trees, and they grew over and made a canopy over the road. I grew up on Pine Street, which was lined with these American elms. There was only one pine. And street after street was that way. And then in the 60s and the 70s, the Dutch elm disease came over, and it started killing these trees off by the millions, fast. And whole cities had no trees. By then, the universities and the USDA had got together and they were developing these new smart trees, if you will, which were the male clones. And so the USDA put out more than 100 different named clones of red maple alone, plus a lot of hybrids, every one of which was a male. This was going on at the universities too, and so this was the new litter-free landscaping. But anyhow, it set the stage for where we're at today. All right, so that's the bottle brush that I was talking about. I'm going to tell another story about bottle brush before I'm done here, I hope. But go ahead and flip. That was the name of my second book. And it was my dad who told me, he said, you got to write a book and put something about sex right in the name of it. And my dad was a lovely guy, but he was an old sort of, what's the word, prude. He was a Puritan. He was Swedish, and you know, he didn't believe in drinking, and he didn't even want to talk about sex. You know, it's my dad. I was like shocked. He's like, yeah, you need to put it. Says people don't realize that plants have sex, much less that one of them's a male and one's a female. And so we came up with that, and it got me on NPR. We had some fun with it. That's a carob tree, and that's a female carob, but there are totally male carobs too, which if you had a child with peanut allergies, it's a legume, would cross-react, soy allergy, all these. This is a female bay tree, very, very rare item and very hard to find. The only person I know besides me that has one is Laureen, because I gave her one. But I looked for years before I found one of these with fruit on it, and then it took me a long time to figure out how to clone it out, but I'm now doing it. I have an associate in Europe who is doing these on a massive number, and yet the big nurseries are turning out the males at millions of them. Go ahead. Okay, this is 1 grain of pollen, magnified, a lot. Mm-hmm. And a grain is so small that if it was in the palm of your hand, you're looking down, you could not see it. You can only see clumps of pollen. It's very tiny. It's probably maybe 15, 20 microns in width. But you see, it's not a warm and fuzzy thing, and the very shape of this thing can cause problems. Go ahead. This is not a very good slide, but what I like about it is that particular tree is said to be 1,500 years old. It's planted outside Old Church in Pollen, and it's a yew. And the yews are 100% male or female, and this particular tree is a female. Now, whoever planted that yew, if it had been a male, that pollen would go into the church when they were there and everything, but no, this tree was protective. It was trapping the pollen. And 1,500 years it sat there, and it still looks pretty good. We should look so good at 1,500. Go ahead, Stuart. All right. Now I just want to talk about yews and Podocarpus. And in this area, you can find both. Seem to be a surprising amount of the yews in Berkeley. But if you get to the East Coast, lots of them. Now, this is a Podocarpus, one of the most common plants around. A lot of them planted at Google. And this one, you'll notice, is what sex? Female. It's got fruit on it. This is the one they don't want because it's got the messy fruit. But what's interesting about that plant, which is a relative to this, it takes more cold weather, is that plant is poisonous and this plant is poisonous, but the fruits are not poisonous, but the seeds are poisonous. But the pollen is poisonous. Now, from that plant, they make Taxol, a chemotherapy drug for breast cancer. From this, they make Podocarpus is called or something, and it's a chemotherapy drug for leukemia. Now, chemo drugs have all these, the idea is to kill the cancer before we kill the patient. So I've encountered many people over the years who are sick, nobody knows what's wrong, none of the testings show what the cause is. Go to their house and I find a big Podocarpus growing right next to the bedroom window or hanging over the house, or in a colder climate, big U's right by the bedroom windows. The pollen is tiny, go right through window screen like it's not there. And these are very potent drugs, and people are getting drugged in a very negative way by these plants because we're selling males. We should only be selling the females, if you would. Okay, these are simply male cones, the opposite of the last slide on a U. Go ahead. They're about to burst full of pollen. Go ahead, flip. That's a female. This is a male Podocarpus, and I hope the next slide looks better. There, that's a little better. That gives you an idea of what these things will do. Real quick story. I hope it's quick. A couple of years ago, I'm at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. to give a talk about April being National Gardening Month. I'm also known as quite the gardener or something, right? Garden guru. And so afterwards, there's a party in the evening at the National Arboretum, which is right across the street from the White House. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's like giant glass, fabulous greenhouse. And this was longer ago than that, but it was after 9/11 and they were checking everybody going in. You had to go through a metal detector and everything, show ID. So we come into this huge glass foyer, which was about as big as this room, except 3 times taller. And I think there were 6 of them. Huge, huge pots, and in each one a huge Podocarpus trained to like a perfect giant pine cone, if you will. And I had my brother Paul with me, and he knows about my work, and he walked up to the first one, and he looked at it, and he went, and he flicked it with his finger, and a little cloud of like dust came off. I was like, oh boy. And Paul says, I wonder if they're all male. And I said, look at them, they're identical. I bet they are, and they were. So Paul goes in, and I know there's a young security guard, big, strong fellow, and he's standing right there. And I said to him, how long do you stand in this particular spot every day? He said, 8 hours. I said, 8 hours? I said, just out of curiosity, do you ever get the feeling that that tree behind you is somehow messing with you? And his eyes got like saucers. He's like, what's with that tree? So I explained to him what I just explained to you. And I said, there's no data on what that will do to you. But if you think it out, it can't be a healthy situation. I said, the only good thing I can think is that they only bloom for about 2 months. And he goes, no, they don't. He says, this is a greenhouse. They bloom all year round here. I was like, oh boy. I said, you know, I think this should probably be a union issue or something. I gave him my card. And right about then, somebody brought the head of the Arboretum out, a lady. She said, I want to talk to you. Took me outside and chewed me out. Didn't know what I was talking about, causing trouble. I hadn't even got a free drink or anything yet. I said, I'll be a good boy, you know. But when I went back in, I told the guy, if they don't move them, contact me, you know. And so I thought that was the end of the story. But then 6 months later, I got an invite from the place to come give a talk on this. And I got there early. And the first thing and it was closed. It wasn't open to the public yet. And I got in with my pass, and I roamed all. At first, in the foyer, those trees were gone. And there had been other different Podocarps in there, some males and some females. But now, the whole place, there wasn't one. They took them all out, and never wanted to see them again. So I did do that fellow a favor. But anyhow, this would be the last thing you would want by your bedroom window. And why is there no data on this? Because an allergist told me years ago. He said, the pollen of the plant is poisonous. If we skin test people, every single person we test will react to it. It won't prove anything. It won't prove allergy. It's a poison. I said, well, okay, I don't care if it's an allergy or poison. It's not healthy, and that's all. All right, go ahead and fire away. This is a very typical, this is down in LA, but this is very typical. You got windows that actually open by a living room. You got male Podocarpus on both sides, and they bloom just when the weather's nice and warm, and you want some fresh air, you open them up, and guess what you get? All right, this is what you get. This was taken through my microscope, and it's a little fuzzy here, but it was clear when I took it. But what is it? What are these grid? What's the grid? Anybody know? Oh, you're a smart lady. Yeah, it's a piece of window screen. I put a little piece of window screen. I shook some of this pollen on it. I wanted to see, I knew it wasn't going to be very protective. It's not protective at all. You can probably put 1,000 at a time. All right, go ahead. Sometimes I give a talk and I have to ask that, and I get a big crowd and nobody figures it out. Well, she's the mother of a Google employee, so I guess she passed on her brains. All right, on the Isle of Guernsey, which if you've never been there, do go, lovely place, which is in the Channel Islands in between England and France. There's a fellow who's been following my work for years, and he owns a large nursery called Q. It used to be called Q Patio Plants, but I think it's now just like Q Plant Center, Queux. It's old Guernsey French or something. And he made tags with a woman's shape and put the OPALS numbers on them, and he tagged every single plant in his nursery. And I said, well, who's going to buy anything that you've got 9 or 10 on? That's the worst. And on the back, it explains what the system is. And he said, well, I want people to know what they're getting. And turned out the people like this system very much. And in truth, he doesn't sell many 9 to 10s, 7s to 8s. But the people have the choice. And as he restocks, he's trying to get more and more 1 to 5s, so to speak. But his name is Nigel Clark, and he's doing something really remarkable. It's starting to spread into Europe. In South Carolina, we have a guy named Grady Roscoe. He's doing the same thing. We don't have anybody in California yet, but hopefully we will. This is a male cedar. Go ahead and flip again. This is a female. They almost look like the males and females. This is the one that produces no pollen. This is a male. This here is a male willow tree, weeping willow. When I was as young as, say, 20, 25, almost every weeping willow I saw was a female clone. Now everywhere I go, they're a male. Very few of these, of the female ones. The females are quite beautiful, but they've now switched to the male. Go ahead, if you would. These are called skyrocket junipers, again by the windows. They're all male. Go ahead. This is blue moffat. It's a female. Looks about the same. Harder to find. Go ahead. No pollen. This is another clone. I don't even remember the name now, but again, males. All right. This is female juniper, and those are the berries. So anyhow, here's a couple of red cedars or junipers, very common landscapes. This is female. This is male. Those are little tiny pollen cones. At certain times, twice a year now, I guess because of global warming or something, the males are now blooming twice a year in the cities. They're blooming in the spring and they're blooming again in the fall. The females, they're trapping pollen. All right, go ahead. This is a female tree. It's African sumac. Hard to find, hard to buy. Go ahead. Okay, there I picked that out there. This is a Chinese pistache tree, Pistachia chinensis. I have seen these trees 70 foot tall and 60 feet wide that were male, and every time the puff of wind hit it, it just looked like the tree was on fire. There was so much smoke coming off. Now bear in mind that that's male, and that is related, direct kissing cousin to poison oak, poison ivy, poison sumac, poison varnish tree. Extremely allergenic pollen, and yet last time I was here, I found at least 200 of these that had been planted in the last couple of years, and 100% were grafted trees, and they were all males. But they're still small, and we could regraft these. So, Paul says, talk about Bruce Jenner. I didn't make a Bruce Jenner slide, but Bruce is giving himself a sex change, all right? Male to female. We could do the same thing with trees. We can graft it to female wood. We could change it. It'd been a lot simpler to plant the right thing in the first place. But when we're dealing with the existing problems, we don't want to wipe out all the trees. There are things to do. This is a female Chinese pistache, little red berries on it. The berries are red, they're ripe at Christmas time. Quite attractive. I don't know why people don't use them anyhow. They're prettier, but they don't. Female mulberry, again, a rare plant. The male's huge amounts of pollen. Go ahead. That's the male. Go ahead. This is a female red maple. Those are the little feathery stigmas. And then show the male. Yeah, there's the male. That tree's only job is to put out pollen. All right, go ahead. This here is a Lombardy poplar tree, tall, skinny ones. I'll show you a slide from Google where they're planting small ones now. It's a male clone, top to bottom, a lot of pollen. Go ahead. The olive family. The first time I was here, I didn't see olives, but today, walking around, I saw a bunch of olives planted. They're fairly young. They're a clone. They're one that doesn't make olives, or very few. Swan Hill, Majestic Beauty. The reason they don't make many is they're basically all males. Now, this is a large family of plants, includes ash, privets, many, many things. There are a huge amount of cross-reactive allergies goes with the olive. Go ahead, Stuart. Okay, so what could you get? You could get racked with latex, tomatoes, kiwis, potatoes, peaches, probably a bunch of other. Birch pollen, they're planting a lot of birch here. The birch reacts with half the foods you eat, it seems like. These aren't always just allergies, they're what they call sensitivities, but what difference does it make? As long as, you eat apple and you feel miserable, it's not good. That's olive pollen. All right, now that is a new clone owned by me. I say owned by me, it's not patented. This is a little one of them. I've been looking for this tree for, 20 years. This is desert olive. That's what the fruit on it looks like. And this is a female. And you can't buy these yet, but I've grown several hundred of them. It took me years and years to find a female. It's a native plant, grows out in the deserts. It's very hard to find. And I found males, but anyhow, outside of Barstow in a gulch, way on a dirt road a few years ago, I found a stand of females, and I brought back some wood and started growing these from cuttings. But this makes a beautiful medium, small-sized tree. It's as drought tolerant as you could possibly get. Grow out there with no water at all, almost. It's hardy into Canada. It'll take extreme cold. There should be millions and millions of these desert grills used. And it is related to the olive, and and the birds like those. Stuart? Yeah, it is, but it's like if you were to eat a olive off the tree. I don't know if you've ever done that, but you don't want to do that. There's a whole process you got to go through. This is another olive, privets. And this is a chianensis. This is a rare female. You could see, again, a little olive-like fruits. This is that same one that they're planting at Google, the male olives, Swan Hill. You could see the pollen on the leaves on that. Flip again. Let's see where, and you could see pollen on the leaves there too. Now, olive pollen, exceptionally allergenic. I, who do not have allergies and look at pollen on slides all the time in the microscope, whenever I handle any olive pollen, I try to be very careful, and I still end up sneezing usually. And on a grain per grain, it's exceptionally potent. Go ahead. The ash is an olive family. All right, this is called shiny xylosma, and there's some here at Google, and in California, it's all over the place. And I gave a talk up in San Bernardino once to a group of master gardeners, and afterwards I mentioned this plant. This is a male flowers. A 90-year-old botanist came up to me and he said, "Do you know that every single xylosma in California is a male?" And I said, "I've known that for a decade, but you're the first person I've ever met that noticed besides me." All right, flip. There are no females in California. This is a female hedge of wax myrtle. A female hedge is a very protective item. It traps pollen coming in. It produces no pollen. That hedge could be taller if they wanted it, but it's very effective. Pollarding. Pollarding, and this is not the most attractive, but I just use that. But anyhow, a lot of these big trees could be pollarded every year, and if they pollard them, you will get no pollen. And in London, they now are pollarding large areas of downtown London with the London plains, which are sycamores, and produce quite a bit of pollen. But they pollard them and they get none. And the reason is you pollard them and then you get all this new growth in the spring. But the pollen doesn't come off the new growth, it comes off a second-year growth. And on some trees, 3-year growth. So depending on the species of tree, there's a pruning system where we could prune away the pollen if we want, if we have the will to do it. So this is an alder. And so, well, these are all male cones. And in the winter, and alders bloom early, produce loads of pollen. And if we, in the winter, before this picture was taken, say we just pruned that much off the ends of the branches, we wouldn't have any pollen that next season. Go ahead. Alder relative. No, not an alder relative. This is an oak. The oak makes these are all male flowers. It makes those on second-year wood. It makes the females on first-year wood interesting. So the more we prune the oak, the messier she would become because of more acorns. But picture those things are trapping pollen and no pollen. So an oak that we did this to would have lots of acorns but no pollen. These are birch catkins, and these are the male catkins. And they formed the year before. So if you look at a birch tree in November, it's already got the male parts formed. They haven't swollen up and released the pollen. That'll happen next spring. But again, they're on the ends. And so if we shear those ends, boom, there's next year that birch. Now Google, all over the place, is planted typically 3 at a time right by the doors. That means it comes in the room, right? One of the worst pollens you could use. But those could all be sheared every year, and that would stop that. Go ahead. I don't know how I had that twice. This shot I just put in because this is my idea of like everything in it is allergenic, all right? The junipers are all male. Somewhere in there, there's male coyote bush, a native, but it's all male, ragweed relative. The trees are male, and in the back, there's another type of trees. And then in the very back, there's Italian cypress, which used to have both sex on them, but now they've managed to turn them into males too. So everything in it is allergy causing. Go ahead. Let's get to Google. All right. So one of the things we want to do if we want to eliminate health problems is we want diversity. It's like, say you wanted a really great workforce. You don't just want men, you want women, you don't want everybody to be 20, you want different ages. You don't want everybody to be lily white, you want all nationalities if you can get them. Diversity, it's a good, wonderful thing. It's very important in landscape. Now here we go, this is in front of some buildings. Every single tree is not the high allergy tree, but not a low allergy tree, some flowering pairs, but every single tree is the same exact tree. Now the next one, this sort of scheme is done over and over here. Okay, so you walk down block after block, and when I walked down them, there was a lot of pollen on the sidewalk, and every single one is a liquid amber tree. Now, 1 or 2 liquid ambers on the block is not a problem. Every tree on the block being a liquid amber, now you've got an allergy problem. You've created what an allergist call a pollen corridor, and we've got a lot of those here. Then again, those could be pruned, but to do it from scratch, this is not how you do it. These are the birch trees by entrances or something. Go ahead. More birch trees by entrances. Male Podocarpus by doors. What else we got? Male poplar trees just planted that'll grow very big, very fast. Male junipers. Didn't find any females. Go ahead. And all these male Chinese pistache trees. I would love, that would be maybe my #1 concern would be to deal with those before they get real big. Otherwise, this is going to be like Pollen City. Let's see where we got next. Okay, here's the bottle brush, again, right by the door. Now, bottle brush pollen does not travel far. If you put it, 20, 30 feet further away or something, not a problem, unless you walk right into it. But right by the door, not a good situation. And male restios, these are newly planted. Go ahead. A female ash tree. There are a number of ash trees around here that are female, but if you look at those, they're huge trees. They were maybe planted by birds or squirrels or something a long, long time ago. Maybe they came with the property. And this is typical. When I go to a landscape, the female trees are the oldest, biggest things. They were planted back when they grew trees from seeds rather than, asexual tissue culture or something like today. Go ahead. But that's an air cleaner tree there. Where we ate the last time I was here, they had this big bamboo. Bamboo is monocarpic. Anybody know what monocarpic would mean in Latin? Mono, one, carpic, life. All right, so one life. That bamboo may live for 100 years and it will only bloom one time. And once it blooms, what happens to it? It dies, right? So we don't know how long it'll live, but since it's only going to bloom one time, we consider that pretty allergy friendly. And that is at Google. All right, so I Googled this and came up with this, Larry Page. He says he's not interested in you doing 10% better. He wants 10 times better. I was like, whoa, okay, so how about instead of replacing a couple of male trees and plant a couple token females, how about you actually did a serious landscape job? How about there's apparently a big Google whole new campus being put in somewhere near here, and they're going to new buildings, new landscaping. How about from the get-go they do this this shining example, like people be like, oh yeah, well this is like the healthiest place in the world to live. I also noticed that Google is #1 on the Forbes America's Best Employees list, and or it was, I don't know, but I'm impressed with the place. It's fun here. I like your Google bikes. I like the Google food, All right. Google has a wonderful reputation. It does. It sparkles with intellectualism and creativity. These are a few native plants. This is a male coyote bush, and then we have a female. They will say we are landscaping with natives. But bear in mind, almost all the plants I'm talking about are native to some part of this country. And so whether it's native or not, they've totally manipulated all the natives. This plant, groundsel or coyote bush, is very drought tolerant, good plant. They sell 6 different clones, all of which are males. It's also a ragweed relative, so the pollen is, all right, go another one. I guess I'm like, I was worried about the time, so I'm like talking fast, but I'm not talking fast, no. I was camping and this came up and I'd only seen him in books. Anybody know what he is? It was in southern Arizona. I was with my son-in-law and he came up and we were teasing him with cheese, which came up and ate. Very cool looking, it's Cudamundi. And he got a tail about this long. And you can run up and down trees, and they're a very tough little, cute little fellow. But I like, I'm an animal lover, so I just had to throw him in. And I guess I'm about for questions. Where are we at are we out of? Oh, I'm supposed to tell this story. So I'm giving a talk in Anaheim Convention Center, and I'm told about the bottle brush. And a lady came up and she says to me, she says, I started to cry when I heard what you were saying about the bottle brush. And I said, well, why? And she said, oh, I can't tell you, I'm embarrassed by it. And I said, well, tell me, it'll be our secret, you know. And I'm sharing it with the world ever since, yeah. She says, we had this dog, a golden lab, and he says, the wonderful dog. And she said, the dog would come in to the living room, then he would sneeze, and then he would shake himself, and then I would start sneezing, my husband would start sneezing, and our children would start sneezing. She said it just seemed to get worse and worse. And then she said, finally we decided he had to go. And it was a fairly old dog, and I was thinking, oh, I don't even want to hear any more about that part, you know. And then she said, our backyard is very open, it's just lawn. And then in the corner of it, there's a big bottle brush, and the branches go right to the ground. And that's the only shade in the yard, and the dog would sit under the tree all the time. Well, a bottle brush pollen is tiny and shaped like little ninja stars, sticking to his fur. So he was coming in, he was getting allergic reactions, shook. But so anyhow, they got rid of the family dog rather than the bottle brush tree, you know, which is a pity. But I don't know why I keep telling that story, but it's illustrative of acting without quite having all the information.
Yeah, I have a question about,
Yeah.
You were talking about all the pollutants that trees take in. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
a city like Chico
Yeah.
that has orange trees.
Yes.
There's street trees, which I thought was fabulous.
Yeah.
Are they,
So this is the question that I don't like to be asked.
oh, sorry.
Asked by my own sister. This opens a sort of a nasty can of worms because I was asked the same question on a BBC radio last fall, and I just sort of fudged. But I'll go on ahead and address that. I would say that the closer you live to that freeway, the less healthy those oranges are for you to eat. There's no other way to figure this out. I would say that if we took a microbiologist or chemist and had him tested, it would be proven rather quickly. I would also say that growing fruit in your own yard is a wonderful way to introduce children to the fact that trees are not just ornamental. And I would also say that most of the oranges that you're talking about are seedless oranges, meaning they're producing parthenocarpic fruit, meaning it's seedless fruit. It didn't even need to get pollinated, it just makes fruit anyhow. And so, yeah, I'm afraid that is the drawback to urban agriculture, if you want. And I used to do community gardens, and I still think it's a great idea. It's just, is it the healthiest thing in the world? I'm not so sure about that part of it. But you could do it organically, and at least it would be an improvement. Yeah. anybody that's listening to me, if what I'm saying makes sense, join with me and help me to make something happen right here at Google. In 2008, the California Department of Public Health put out their 7-year plan initiative for asthma. I was one of the 25 experts that they brought in. It says in the plan that we shouldn't plant any more male trees, shrubs, that we should plant a lot more females. It said that the landscapes at all the schools, at all the hospitals, at all the public places should be allergy friendly. But that was 2008 and it still isn't happening. So like this is my, maybe my, I doubt it's my last ditch. I'll probably be pushing this one way or another just because I feel strongly about it. But if I could make something happen just by virtue of being here, and I'm here because Laureen invited me, then a very wonderful, powerful thing, and this is a small group of us, but I appreciate you that have stayed with me here. And it's impossible to give a talk without getting some feedback from your audience. And it's like everybody that's here is giving me some good feedback, and so I thank you for that. But I'll stop right there, all right? Yeah, thank you.